Thank you very much. Delighted to talk here today. I suppose first of all I'd like to use the opportunity. I'm going to talk about AranLIFE, and of course AranLIFE comes from initial work that the Heritage Council done. So I'd like to thank them and acknowledge them for the initial work they did that both led to the AranLIFE, and then AranLIFE now has another EIP project coming up. So all in all, it's about €4 million that has come into the Aran Islands and management of high nature value areas, thanks to initial work that the Heritage Council initiated. When I sort of had to give this talk, and I thought of culture, and culture means so many things, and I started thinking what exactly is culture, and I started looking up definitions of culture and cultural landscapes, and what is a cultural landscape, do you know? And everybody, no matter where they're from, would assume that there's a cultural element to it. But it's probably fair to say that some landscapes have more stronger cultural element than others. And apologies to anybody from Derry, but I just happened to be in Derry one day and took that photograph there. And it's probably fair to say that it's not as strong as a cultural landscape as the Aran Islands. So maybe you disagree, but it's probably fair to say that. And the Aran Islands are unique, you know, and they're very much a man-made place, you know. You couldn't replace them. They've taken thousands of years to build up this way. And they've been there, and if you look at if you use culture, historic monuments as a measure of culture, the red dots there are historic monuments that Margaret referred to earlier on the island. So there's historic monuments everywhere. We can add 30 more dots to that map now thanks to the AranLIFE project, because part of our work is when we come across anything that we might be thinking is interesting and possibly a historic monument, we employ an archaeologist to come and have a look at it and see it. And thanks to that, there's 30 more new red dots on that map since we came, which is a nice part of a Nature 2000 or a LIFE project, that you're bringing in these elements as well. Basically, it's for us so that we don't ensure we don't damage them when we're building rain catchers and things like that. So when you think of the cultural landscape of the Aran Islands, and don't forget, 250,000 people visit the islands every year, and they go to see certain elements of it. First of all is the narrow borings throughout that lead to each of the farms. You know, and it's a different farming system. We have one farmer in the island, I was just chatting to him, he's 32 hectares. 32 hectares is in 40 different blocks of land made up of 170 fields, individual fields. That's a different landscape, a very difficult landscape to manage, a farm to manage, do you know? And he has to get to it through his narrow borings, so even getting stuff to it, you know. So the walls are all part of the cultural landscape. Second, we have just getting into those fields are the barna, you know. These are the gates, the island's gates, made out of stone, you know. And again, access is an issue. If you have to rebuild those on 170 fields, how does that affect nature conservation on the island as well? Other things, rain catchers, do you know, they've no water, no running well, few springs, but they sort of disappear a day after the rain stops, do you know. So rain catchers, all part of the agricultural system. And I'm talking here about that agricultural system is the cultural element of the land. And then still small-scale crop production, which even since I've been coming is less and less over the last 7 years. Now it's got less and less. As well as that, you have, of course, that many of the fields are man-made. You know, there was slabs of rock, sand was brought in, seed was brought in, and as a result, these over time have become very rich calcareous grasslands, which are designated to be protected as calcareous grassland. Yet you can no longer make any more new land, you know, because the limestone's also designated. So the designation in itself, some farmers would argue, saying, sure, we made those calcareous grasslands, we can't do it anymore. But for me, actually, so much land is scrubbing up and we're losing much more land. That's not an urgent thing. But if I'm a farmer on the island, I may think differently. Some farmers may think differently. So very quickly, I just want to tell you about the AranLIFE project. It's an EU LIFE project, 75% co-funded because it's all priority habitat. Runs from 2014, was to run to 2017, but we got an extension. The coordinating beneficiary is Department of Arts, Heritage and Gaeltacht, or what their new name is, and Teagasc are the associated beneficiary, and then the co-funders are the Heritage Council, Fáilte Ireland, Galway County Council, and the Department of Agriculture. And it's quite interesting, Fáilte Ireland tourist and an agricultural project, but agriculture, and we've tried to prove this, agriculture, and we have proved it, and farming, tourism are greatly linked on the island. People come to see the landscape, which is an agricultural landscape. So what's our projects about? Well, this is what it's about. Working with farmers, 67 farmers, to produce and to maintain these fantastic species-rich grasslands as best as possible. And that's the basis of the project. We've got 67 farmers and we're working with them. Every farmer does a slightly different way. We're gathering information from them. We're looking at what has to be done. And how do we do that? Well, these fantastic species-rich grasslands are maintained by the grazing animals, and that's what we need. We need grazing animals on it. So we need to talk to the farmers about what were the main issues, and the issues were access. So the farmers themselves told us access. These narrow borings and stuff, they're fantastic places for briars to grow up because they're protected. They block up. The clearing of a boring, spending 3 or 4 days to clear a boring to get to a field that you're going to graze with 2 cows for maybe a week. Is it worth it? You won't do it. You just pack it in and walk away from it, and then that field scrubs up, So we've cleared up to 30 hectares of boring. Next thing, once you don't, because there's maybe not enough water in the field, it starts to scrub up. So removal of scrub, and we've removed about 80 to 90 hectares of scrub to date, to bring back the priority grasslands. Cattle need water, and that's probably the biggest issue, and not the biggest issue that we identified when we were drawing up the plan, but the provision of rain catchers. And I'll come to a wee bit more of that later on, this provision of rain catchers. And finally, implementation, bringing cattle into graze to make sure they're grazed to a certain level. And we've sort of linked that to a sort of an outcome-based agri-environment scheme just to get some measure. Once you get cattle grazing, of course, then there are some species-rich grasslands are not overly nutritious. I suppose from my agricultural background, they do lack a lot of vitamins. There's no phosphorus going into the agricultural system in the island, so phosphorus deficiency in livestock is a problem. So we're also looking, if we want these areas grazed, we have to look at supplying the right nutrients as well, supplement with the right minerals. So that's part of our project. And public awareness, both at a local, national and international level. And we produce a range of leaflets of the plants. We've been really encouraged because what has happened is the islands are putting their own signs up now based on the information that we supply, and we help them with that, So that brings to me about managing a LIFE project on a Natura 2000 site, some of the issues, some of the problems when it comes to from a cultural heritage point, and working in a very cultural landscape, where you're going to get complaints if people, maybe not from the islanders themselves, but we would get complaints from somebody who visits from elsewhere in Ireland and said, I see they're putting gates up or something, this is terrible, or the rain catchers or something. So we have to be aware of that. This is Inishmaan. The red lines are the area of the SAC. So a large part of the island is designated. In fact, the only areas that really aren't designated is the strip where all the houses is, and a strip of more semi-improved, although in a true sense it's still quite species rich, But you're talking about a highly designated area, and how do we work with that? First thing I just wanted to mention about access, Right, so we want to get cattle in, we want to get rain, we want to build rain catchers. This is a barna. It's part of the way, and the farmers closed up the field. It's a work of art. It's fantastic. Look at that. Having to build those stones perfectly. The very fact that they picked rounded stones, sometimes rounded granite, because they could knock them down. They're easier to knock down if they're rounded and build them up again. But again, if you're building up on 40 different land units, it takes an awful long time. And as a result, shortcuts are taken, and you get this type of thing here. This is a halfway measure, but this is the main thing. And actually the islanders don't like it themselves, because you'll actually see the old one lying rotting beside it, So in an ideal world, we might say, yes, it'd be great to have all the barnet because tourists like them, but for the locals, they're not practical, So we have to sort of come up with a halfway measure, and is this the approach that we take that still gives quick access, that fits in quite well, but it's still not as artistic as the barnet, But these are sort of the things that you're dealing with when you're dealing with a farmed landscape, The same would apply with the rain catchers. Now, it's very important. Cattle have to get water. On an agriculture point of view, this is perfect. There's no problem. And this was the landscape that I showed you in Derry. Every paddock could have that in, and nobody would complain. But on an island there are islands, they don't look as well. These plastic things all around the place, they don't look as well, even though they supply water. Again, we work with farmers to build them. Some of them design their own, very practical ones. The likes of that one there, where the slip is, he can store more water because the slip's underneath, because you're sort of limited in size how you can build them. He would say that they're less prone to algae growth inside them because they're covered. So practically very good. But people will say, oh, that doesn't fit into the Aran landscape. Now, there's so many walls that they do actually fit in quite well, because you have to actually be in the field to see it. That's the thing. Or this sort of, the one that is the main one going in at the moment, sort of is just a block concrete structure, But they do blend in quite well. But we have to think about that. But if you let the farmers maybe build themselves, some of the work that is done, there's one there that Sean O'Donnell did. Fantastic. The amount of work that man went, everything had to be carried up on his shoulders. Everything, had to be carried up on his shoulders up a cliff to get to that. He wasn't going to bring blocks up there when he had stones. Fantastic bit of work, And again, Bill, he would see it. He'd be very strong into the culture element. These are the traditional way that it was done. This is the way. So all his are like that, Another farmer, Padraig Nadine O'Flaherty, just couldn't bear the sight of concrete blocks, in the landscape. This is on the cliff face, so he carried all the cement down, all the blocks down, but felt, no, I have to face that, So that's leaving within the farmers themselves the cultural element of the programme and giving them, and we get different views. The next one, which is this one here, won an award for Bord Bia. The farmer who did that said, look, this is on a tourist site. I'd far rather do a block one, is much easier, but tourists is my livelihood as well. He works in it. This looks better than a block built one. Went all the bother. Now, it would have cost him, time-wise, 3 times the time, cost him, to do that. But he saw it as important. So that's people within our project looking at the cultural element of it and trying to reflect that in the work they do. And while everybody thinks that's an old one, that's a new one, done exactly, keeping the practices of doing it. So trying to implement them without being dogmatic about it. We produced guidelines of what we liked, but we didn't come up with, you must do these ones at all, because we're trying to work in a living landscape with farmers managing the ground, or managing the farm. And just this one here, I always liked. This was one where actually it drips. The spring drips out, So he managed to do that. And then I was just chatting to him, and I said, do you think, would you think about stoning it? So when the next time I was driving past it the other day, and he's done that to it, to make it blend into the landscape, which is a recognition of the landscape, the importance of landscape on the islands. So that brings us down. The next thing we'd say too is the borings, these narrow borings, which are lovely. They really are nice. You walk through them, they're beautiful, Practically, they're not great, Like if you want to get anything up there, you can't. So much so that in some cases, continental cows that are being farmed in the islands that are pregnant won't go up them. They're too heavy themselves, and farmers have to knock walls. So from a nature conservation point of view, it'd be much easier to knock that wall down on the right and make a lane up there, and open the whole place up, But once you mention that, everybody goes, oh, you can't do that. Jeez, that'd be terrible, getting rid of the narrow boring, And the borings have a start, like the reason that boring is so narrow, so the farmers tell me, is it likely leads to a crag or a rocky place that you were never going to make into land. So you would never need two baskets on a donkey to bring seaweed up. So even the narrowness of them reflect the quality of the land that they led to. But these are some of the issues that we would have to think about and work with the farmers on. We're managing a LIFE project that can cause us issues, but we have to take that into account. So the other sort of, I've thought about some of these, and the question arrived about how in Natura 2000 sites and SACs, how do you work in culture landscape? And I'm just going to give you an example of 3 calcareous limestone areas in Ireland, and I'm equating cultural with management, and how they were managed. And of course, we've got the wonderful Burren, which is most of our fields are big fields, and the cattle, it's a set stocking. The cattle are turned out from the winter, sometimes coming from other areas in the past. That's the management of them. Then on the Fermanagh Cavan border, we've got limestone grasslands again, where that winterage, that history of winterage doesn't apply. It was the only dry land in Fermanagh and Cavan, you know, so you grazed it all year round. And then with the burren, which is not a set stocking like the other two, but is really a paddock rotational grazing system, you know. They go around all the different fields. So they're managed, culturally they're managed totally different. But when we come to reporting on their quality, we use the exact same criteria to say what are negative species, what are positive species, what percentage of scrub. Yet the islands with all the walls is going to favour briars, you know. So maybe we should be looking at sort of the cultural element when we come in, and maybe the guidelines are wide enough. I don't know. I'm just asking the question. You know, maybe when we're looking at how we assess areas, say under Article 17 and under favourable condition, we should take the cultural management, because that has affected the vegetation as well, you know, just as much as climate has as well. So finally, I'm going to just finish with our cow. This is a cow designed by a committee, but it sort of embraces all. So it didn't turn out to a camel after all. But I just found it quite interesting. A local artist, Ronan Gilfodrick, did that first, based on sort of things we threw up and what we thought was important. And Ronan was from the islands, felt that the walls were important, so it was sort of made up, you can see the wall structure. Now if you look through it, you'll see everywhere in it the wildlife associated with it too. Naturally, because I'm coming, and the team I work with, coming from a nature conservation point of view, we highlight the nature conservation end of it came through. I showed my sister it before it was done to this stage, and she's quite a good artist, and she redrew it, and her was, well, where's the hand of man? You know, where is it? You know, so she drew it again, because that was her emphasis on it. But if you do actually look, there's a hand at the top and a hand at the bottom to incorporate all together. But I would hope, even before this, that our cow that we sort of designed embodies all the cultural elements as well as the nature conservation into it, and that's what we'll be using hopefully as our new logo and the logo for Cuimhne Aran, the project that follows that. So thank you very much. That's all I have to say.